I think the truth is that the humanitarian system is not very anticipatory. It is largely responsive. That's natural in a way because the whole object of it originally was to respond to disasters and conflicts and suffering and try to deal with that. And of course that's still very important. You have to have the international humanitarian system and all the different organisations in it ready to respond to major disasters and major suffering in the world. What we have not done enough of, by a long way, is to try to make sure that we are reducing the risk of disasters, reducing the impact of disasters before they happen, preventing them where we can, but that's very difficult. You can't prevent earthquakes and you can't prevent natural disasters, but you can make a huge difference to the results of them if you've done the right things first. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that we are investing in disaster risk reduction. That's governments, international organisations, NGOs, everybody's investing in that. Everybody's recognising the importance of it and making a difference in that way. The problem with this is that it's easy to say and hard to do. Everybody recognises the need to do it, intellectually the need to invest in prevention and the case for doing that, but actually generating the resources, taking the decisions, deciding to invest before something happens is very difficult. There are examples we can cite where it works. The example I often give is Bangladesh. Bangladesh has been used to having huge cyclones and tidal surges in its delta area, and therefore has developed ways of dealing with it. It has good early warning systems, people know where to go, there are shelters. It doesn't stop them happening, it doesn't reduce sometimes the damage of them in terms of the damage to the agriculture, but it massively reduces the death toll, for example. The death toll from those cyclones used to be 300,000 or 400,000 people. Now it's 3,000 or 4,000. Now that's still an awful lot of people, but it's a big difference. If you contrast that with what happened in Burma, Myanmar in 2008, or was it 2009, when Cyclone Nargis hit, totally unprepared, no early warning systems of any kind, 140,000 people were killed, the damage was absolutely enormous. So, you can see very clear examples of that. Now, does that make governments spend as much as they should? No, it doesn't. And even in the US, we can see that Hurricane Katrina hit unprepared defences which people knew were unprepared but hadn't been ready to spend the money on. So even in the most advanced societies it can happen. But that's an illustration of why we need to change these behaviours and why we also need to break down the barriers between humanitarian and development actors, because it's a totally artificial barrier, as we know. And that's one of the reasons why things don't happen. It's humanitarians are talking about it because they know what the consequences of these disasters are, and development actors are worrying about all sorts of other things at the same time, so they're not spending the money. Well, I think it's essentially a development responsibility. That means it's the governments themselves, it means it's the international organisations which are engaged in development who have the primary responsibility to make sure that whatever they're doing in terms of development factors in disaster risk reduction and prevention. And if you do it right at the beginning of an infrastructure project, it costs much less than trying to retrofit it afterwards. So that's where the action should be. Now, why are the humanitarian actors involved? Because they can see that the development actors are not doing it, not doing it enough. And the humanitarians are left with the consequences of that lack of investment. So they're the ones saying, please invest in this, we need to do this. Otherwise we're constantly dealing with disasters, the consequences of which could be much less. Now, humanitarians have their own responsibility. We need to make sure we are properly prepared. That's governments as well as international organisations and NGOs. So we have the stockpiles in the right place, and we have the people in the right place and the right skills to do it. We need to be better at that. The other thing we need to do much more of is improving local capacity to deal with these problems themselves. So governments should be able to deal with most disasters in their countries without international help. There'll always be some massive catastrophes where no government can cope, but if we develop local capacity, local government's ability to deal with it, that's a good way of using our resources and if you like, working ourselves out of a job. Unfortunately, we're not going to be out of a job anyway, because climate change is going to increase the level of and intensity of these disasters, a number of them. But wherever possible, we should be allowing the local actors to do it. Well, I think leaders have to do this. I think because it's slightly contrary to human nature, that makes leadership even more important. Now, ideally, this will be a bottom-up movement, and it can be because people in a disaster-prone area usually know what the problems are, and if given the right kind of help, they can do it. But leaders need to take on the arguments, to do the advocacy, to persuade people that spending money on this really is worth it and really is necessary. And they need to change the culture within their own organisations to say, responding is not enough. You have to respond, but we need to spend more on prevention and anticipation. We need to be better prepared for these disasters when they happen. We need to invest more in local capacity, even if it sometimes goes against the grain to do that. That's what we need to do. So leaders have got to play that role and have got to go against the current and make sure it happens. Well, I think one thing we do need to do is to find ways of getting this message across to the public and to the media which are more interesting. Because the intellectual case is compelling but boring at the same time. We need to have stories. I mean, there was a very good story at the time of the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean of a little girl who actually had read about tsunamis in her geography lesson the week before and happened to be on holiday. And she told everybody what to do when she saw the sea receding. And a lot of people escaped just because of her knowledge. Now, that's a kind of interesting human story which can bring the thing to life in a way that endless people like me pontificating about the need to do it can't. So we need to find those sexy, interesting stories to get the media to pay attention, because I know from my own experience that getting them to pay attention to this is very hard.